So we are talking about thinking traps this morning. And before we get into that, again, I've already talked about the data collection. If anyone does need a hand with the data collection or you're interested to understand more, please let me know. I'll be really happy to talk about it. If you are playing along with the data collection, this is what you should see on your Apple Watch. If you're using an Apple Watch, you should see a little play, and you should see, this was me this morning, you should see actually on your app that there is a green, that there's a connection, and you should see some numbers underneath. So what we're measuring there is how much cognitive attention your brain is giving to this talk this morning, and also measuring how much you feel trust for what's happening. So that's a measure of your dopamine and your oxytocin. So that's what we're measuring this morning. And that's going to help me understand what are the parts of this talk that have really resonated with you, and what are the parts that have resonated with you less, so that I can make sure that I adjust as I go. So thank you. If you're playing along, thank you. If you're not playing along, thank you. All right. So for those people who don't know me, my name is Samantha. I'm an expert in the decision-making space. My background is pretty diverse. I know I've got a couple of people on the call who I have worked with in the past. And so that's been predominantly in financial services, but I have worked with lots of different industries and organizations, certainly over the last 6 or so years. So I'm also recognized as a master neuroplastician. So what that means is that my work is really focused on how can I help people actually get better and actually build stronger neural pathways, rather than just, hey, this is nice information, I've had fun. I am hopefully soon to be Dr. Rush. Also, my PhD, which is in team decision making, is under examination right now. I have one of my 2 examiners has already submitted their feedback, and the second one is due today. So it's due tomorrow. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen next, because that's been 5.5 years of quite a bit of hard work. So watch this space for when I start to share the findings of my very own research, although I will talk about it a little bit today because it is relevant here. Okay, so I'd love to hear from you at this point. What is one reason in your experience that people stay quiet? So when you're in a meeting, which might be 2 people, might be 10 people, might be 20 people, what have you either felt, or what have you seen? Or what have you heard?
Disengagement or totally lost.
Yeah, disengagement, totally lost.
People
Lack
don't
of
want to.
confidence. Oh, sorry.
No, all good. You go first.
Lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence, yes.
I was going to agree.
Yeah, don't want to look stupid.
Some people need processing time.
Yes, definitely. And Alice, I know you wanted to jump in with something.
No, sort of similar to the last couple, but I'd also go if they don't feel like they've got authority in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all reasons why people can stay quiet. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them actually track back to trust, which is a really fundamental thing that we as humans need to have and is evolutionary. We need to feel trusted, and we need to trust others. So trust is really fundamental to information sharing. And this is one of the key things that's come out of my research as well, looking at information sharing and psychological safety, and how do those relate. And they do relate very strongly. It is definitely significant. So having trust when you have a group of people together, and you know what, realistically, it's also trust in yourself. You've got to have that too in order to be able to make really great decisions. So we're going to talk today about 4 different cognitive biases, or thinking traps, as I've called them, that can influence trust. So they can erode trust, or, if you can put controls in place, they can increase trust. And those things can influence the way that people share information. So by the end of our time together, and I will have plenty of time for questions as well, as I love a bit of Q&A, you're going to be able to know what these 4 cognitive biases are. You're going to know what the signals are that you can start to look for them in yourself and in others. And I'm going to give you at least one kind of control that you can put in place if you see this happening, or even if you want to do it as a preventative thing. I haven't seen this cognitive bias in place, but I'm just going to put this in here because I want to make sure that it doesn't come up. So hopefully that plan sounds okay. No news is not good news. My mum says this to me all the time when I speak to her, and she says, "We know what's going on." I say, "Oh, not much." She goes, "No news is good news." But when it comes to being a leader, this is not always the case. People not speaking up doesn't necessarily mean they're okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean they agree with you and the situation that's going on. So it can be a signal that there's something going on with trust. It doesn't definitely mean that, but it is an indicator for you that you might need to ask some more questions. Or at least, kind of dig into what might be happening. Why is this important? Excellent question. There was some really interesting research done in 2022, so it's quite new. It's a meta-analysis that looked at over 60,000 employees, so it's a pretty big study. And it looked at silence and performance of teams. And what they found was that dissent, which is where people share any information that is different to what's already been said, doesn't necessarily mean it's in disagreement, but it's just different information. What it does is it fuels innovation and improvement across multiple areas. So in what we're doing, how we're working, so it can impact tasks and relationships as well as processes. So dissent can be really positive. And I think a lot of people, when we hear the word dissent, it's not always thought about in a positive way. So what that means is that when we don't have dissent, you're more likely to keep to the status quo. There's no change. There's no breakthrough thinking. And in this day and age, I don't think any business can afford to live in the status quo space because there is just too many things that are changing around us. So silence can be really, really costly. Silence isn't always agreement. It's certainly not golden. It can be really costly. So what's happening here is that in terms of a little bit of a cycle, is it actually ends up to be either a virtuous or a vicious cycle when it comes to trust. And I just realized they both start with V, which makes me very happy. So what's happening here is trust makes people want to share information. So it will increase the likelihood that they will share their voice. The more information you have and the more diverse information you have, because lots of people have shared their voice, the better your decision quality is because you have a broader set of information to make your choices from. When decisions are made well, it reinforces trust. And so you end up with this great cycle where it leads to, future trust and information sharing. And the other really interesting thing that has come out in research is that even if people observe other people sharing information, they feel trust and they then are more likely to share information. So it's observation as well as specific behavior that you're involved in. So trust is absolutely the foundation to great information sharing and great decisions. Is it possible that you can have too much information shared and too many decisions? Absolutely. That can lead to analysis paralysis, but there are different tools and techniques that can help with reducing those things. So the 4 thinking traps we are going to look at today is, I have to duck down so you can see the last one. They are groupthink, authority bias, the false consensus effect, and bias blind spot. They're the 4 that we're going to look at. But before I get into the detail, I just wanted to just talk for a minute about what are these cognitive biases anyway, because I'm sure that most of us have heard about cognitive biases, and sometimes they're talked about as something that can be quite negative. So I just want to set the record straight as what are we talking about here. So our brains is actually a high performance vehicle. It is built for really rapid response in high pressure environments. And that's because it's built to do one thing, and that is keep us alive. We are built to survive as creatures, as humans, as beings. And so that's the way that our brain has evolved. This means just like any other high performance pieces of equipment, it comes with some pre-programming, it comes with some filters, and it comes with some default settings. And these things aren't necessarily put in place for accuracy, but it's for speed and survival. And so when things don't quite go as we expect, then sometimes they can lead us astray. So I want to have a look at cognitive biases and their I suppose that what they do from both a neuroscience perspective as well as a psychology perspective. So from a neuroscience perspective, these default settings or these pre-programmed rules and filters, they're adaptive. So it's part of evolution. They help us really quickly spot danger, make predictions, as well as a really important one is to conserve mental energy. Remember, our brains weigh 2% of our body weight, but they conserve a lot more energy than that. Would anyone like to care to guess at what percentage of our body's energy is consumed by our brain?
90.
90? Not quite. Not quite that high. It's quite a bit less, actually, mate. It's 20%. So even though our brains weigh 2% of our body, they conserve 20% of our energy. So what that means is that our brain has to put things in place to try and conserve energy. So it fills in gaps. It prioritizes the things that emotionally charge us. And the other thing that it does is it suppresses things that it thinks are irrelevant. So it's running on performance mode. From a psychology perspective, what's happening is we're cruising along in this, it's almost like snooze control mode, but sometimes something happens, a data point doesn't fit, there's some kind of nuance in the decision, someone challenges you, it's not what you expect, and it kind of throws us off autopilot. You know, sometimes when you're driving using cruise control and something happens and you get this thing going, you know, we're turning off cruise control monitoring, you're like, what? That is what's happening sometimes when you're under the influence of these cognitive biases, and it can steer us in a different direction to what we actually intend unless we do some kind of manual override. So with that story from those two perspectives, it's important to note that cognitive biases aren't flaws, they're features. They're features of our high performance vehicle that helps us do our job efficiently, which is staying alive. And unless conditions change to what we expect, and then sometimes we need to take the wheel. So they're not flaws, they're features, which is good to know, right? So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, we know that there's 4 cognitive biases, and you've probably heard of some other ones in your travels, but it might surprise you to know, as shown in the Cognitive Bias Codex here, there are over 180 identified cognitive biases that we have. And I'm going to be honest, I don't even know what they all are and how they work because there are just so many of them. But the point that demonstrates is we are just so pre-programmed to act and behave and think in certain ways. And it's our thinking and the way that our brain works that drives everything else that happens. Our behavior, how we interact with others, what decisions we make, how happy we feel, how unhappy we feel, the relationships we have. So understanding the cognitive biases that might be common for you are really important. So, summary, cognitive biases are evolutionary. It's how we've been evolved. You know, where we prioritize survival, not about being logical or objective. It's all about how do we survive and get out of this. They're automatic. So most of these happen and we're not even aware of them. They happen subconsciously outside of our conscious awareness. Has anyone heard of that system 1, system 2, fast thinking, slow thinking? Yeah, so it's that. So you
Love that book.
It's a great book. So your cognitive biases is system 1 thinking. And what we have to try and do sometimes, depending on the context, is how can we slow that down? The last thing is their persistence. So even people who are trained in bias recognition are still prone to them. So you can't logic your way out of them. It doesn't work like that. So it's very important to be aware of them, to know how to spot them, and to also have techniques that you can try and avoid them or just control for them, I think is a good way to think about it. So you can't turn off the autopilot. There is absolutely nothing you can do bar having a lobotomy, which I don't think any of us really wants to have. So you can take the wheel when you need to, which means self-awareness and other awareness, and having some techniques and tools up your sleeve to be able to control. So enough of the preamble, Samantha. Let's talk about these 4 cognitive biases. So I will talk about them in order. And as I talk about them, I'd love for you to have a think about an example that you can kind of grasp on. Yeah, actually, I think this is what was happening in this situation. Just so that you can connect to each of the cognitive biases. If you would like to share a story or an example of when you've seen this, please feel free. I will pause after each one if anyone does want to share, but you know, only if you're happy and comfortable to do so. Number one, so groupthink, and this is actually the cognitive bias is called the bandwagon effect. And this one is all about adopting an idea or getting on board with something because other people are doing it, but you're not really doing any kind of independent verification. Thanks, Vienna. So it can create a lot of damage because people feel like they're pressured to conform, that they can't speak up something different, that if they've got a dissenting view, or they're seen as a minority, and a minority can be both a mindset or some other kind of minority. People feel like they have to stay silent, and then what happens as a result of that is people feel like they're unheard and that nobody cares about them. So it is important to be able to see where the groupthink is happening. So what the signs that you might look for with groupthink is that ideas are it starts to snowball and everyone just starts getting on board for whatever this idea is, but no one's talking about alternative ideas. No one's putting in challenges. No one's asking about risks. No one's talking about any of that, and it's all happening very fast. So that's what you can look for with groupthink. A couple of examples of groupthink, if I can say it correctly. The first one is that came to my mind was Titan Ocean Gate. Has anyone seen that documentary on the Titan Ocean Gate? I think it's on Netflix. You know, the submersible that went down to the Titanic and imploded. So what was happening there, and actually it's a combination of the next cognitive bias and this one. But what was happening is that nobody raised concerns. Nobody was really, well, some people did raise concerns, but they got squashed, which is the next one. But everyone just kind of got on the bandwagon. Yeah, this is fantastic. Yeah, I know that, there's been a crack in the hull, but yeah, this is fantastic. And so it led to, as we now know, that disaster. Another example is the Challenger disaster. And so this was a spacecraft back in 1986. And the scientists were talking about the temperature of, when the space rocket took up, and that they didn't think that the O-rings could actually withstand that temperature. But when so that's what the scientists were saying. But when all the NASA people got together, they're like, no, we're going to go. And nobody talked about it. Nobody raised it. And well, it was a massive disaster and exploded like seconds after taking off. And I think six people were killed. So when people don't feel that they can raise their dissenting perspectives, it can be not good. Can anyone think about an example of groupthink that maybe you've seen or been a part of? Is there a judgment?
I don't mind going. I've been on two sides of the coin before. Once when we were part of a team that we feel like we were diverse enough in terms of thinking. And then when it came to brainstorming on projects, we just went like rapid fire and keep going. Hardly any risks raised and all that. And I've also been in situations where I feel like I, don't get an opportunity to jump in to ask something. And when I do, it doesn't really conform with the groupthink. And it's either treated as, a silence treatment. So like, pretty much, I don't understand what you're talking about, and let's keep going. So I've been on both sides, and both sides aren't great.
No, both sides definitely aren't great. Thanks, May. So we'll move on to number two. And number two, as I mentioned, is, the solution. Should give you that, shouldn't I? So a control here is to assign it a devil's advocate. So the devil's advocate, depending on the group that you have, can be either an individual or it could be a team, if you're working with teams of teams. There is some research that a artificial devil's advocate doesn't necessarily lead to the best results. So a way that you can get around that is by actually inviting someone into the discussion who is a divergent thinker and who does think differently and who isn't like everyone else, and give them a brief in advance that says, please introduce different ideas, introduce questions, make us think. And so that's a way that you can mitigate for groupthink. Yes, May, you have a question?
I do. So when that happens, though, how do we prime the rest of the group? because if the rest of the group isn't gonna come to the party, let's say, then that plan might backfire.
Yeah, you could certainly let everyone know in advance. So you could prime everyone to say, I've asked Britt to be our our devil's advocate today. Britt's coming along with this experience, and Britt's job is to introduce divergent ideas, is to introduce dissent. So you can kind of set that up. And I think if you explain the reason why and what you're trying to do, it, I mean, who is going to be upset about hearing different ideas? And I think if someone is upset about that, then that's a very different conversation to have with them.
Okay, I might not take up everyone's time here, but I have like another spin-off idea in terms of that probably needs to be driven, like leadership needs to drive that, I guess, like top down. Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether that be a hierarchical leader or someone who is leading a project, being able to introduce what's happening and why is actually really important as well for people feeling included and agency. Nobody likes anything to be dumped on them, so I think setting things up in advance so people know what's happening and why is really important. Good point. Good pickup. So the next one, which again is connected to Ocean Gate, is authority bias. So this is where people give more weight to what people who are seen as a point of authority say than someone who is not in a point of authority. So what this looks like is people feel like they're in fear. They're in fear to be able to, if they say something that might challenge a leader, and so they just stay quiet. And so what happens then is that lots of people aren't talking, collaboration is reduced, and everyone's just living in a state of fear. Or what also could happen in the long term is that people stop even trying because they know it's like, well, what's the point? So they kind of become a little bit acquiescent. There's no point me saying anything because whatever the leaders or whoever the authority says is going to be what happens anyway. So what you can look for signals this is happening is if the amount of information shared in the discussion that happens really significantly reduces after the leader gives their opinion. Everyone kind of goes quiet. If there's minimal debate about anything that a person in authority introduces or even endorses. And the other one is when the leader says something and there's lots of non-verbal agreement around the room. So you see nodding, you see smiling, you're not hearing a lot of challenge. What's going on there is people might be nodding along, but they don't necessarily agree, like the nodding dog, but they don't actually voice what it is that they're thinking. A couple of examples of this authority bias in the wild, if you like, is the Enron. So from the research that I've done into Enron, there was a whole bunch of people who knew what was happening, but the leaders were saying, no, this is what's happening, and so they didn't speak up. Or the Milgram experiment is another one where people, were getting electric shocks. They weren't actually getting electric shocks, but people thought they were giving electric shocks, and they were being told it was, it's okay for us to do that. And so this authority bias of, well, actually it's going to be okay because that's what the leader said, and we're just going to go along with what the leader said. So your control in this is whoever's seen as the point of authority, get them to speak last. And if you're the leader, speak last. Let everyone else speak first so that nobody else is influenced by what it is that you have to say. Anything you'd like to share? Any stories? Perfectly okay if you don't have any.
I think this one happens all the time, thousands of examples, but one that springs to mind is running portfolio prioritisation sessions, and the most senior person gets priority number one, despite all the facts that and data that wouldn't support that ranking in the prioritisation process, and everyone just moves on and off we go.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that one too, Britt, obviously, given our shared history. But yeah, absolutely. That's a great example, and it happens all the time. All the time. So we'll move on to number 3, and this one is the false consensus bias. And this one makes us believe that everyone else disagrees with us. Yes, weekly dilemma. Very, very true, May. So this is the assumption that more people share your opinion than actually do. What this means is that it reduces openness. People feel like it's already been decided. My job's not going to change anything. Nobody's asking me what I think. And what that means is that trust starts to erode because people aren't being consulted. They're not being asked if they have another view. So again, they might feel like their unspoken ideas and concerns don't matter. So the things that you can look for to see if this is happening is if someone or the leader says something like, so we're all in agreement, but no one's actually discussed anything, or so we know what we're doing, but it hasn't actually been agreed. If there's a limited effort to solicit alternative viewpoints, so like a cursory stand at the front of the room, has anyone got anything else to say? No? Okay, great, let's go. So that's a sign of the false consensus effect. And then the last one is that decisions are made without even eliciting or capturing dissenting voices. So they're the signs that you can look for there. And an example of this in the wild is New Coke. So back in 1985, Coke thought that they would introduce a new recipe that was going to be really super cool and everyone was going to love it, right? And the result was there was like mass unhappiness in this new formula that Coke had put together, and they actually had to go back to the old recipe pretty quickly because they all really felt like this new Coke recipe was going to be the one. This is really going to, innovate us. And they assumed that everyone else would say the same, but that's actually not. For any Coke lovers out there, can you think of any examples where you've seen the false consensus effect? Okay, no problem. Let's move on to number 4. And this one is an interesting one.
Oh, Sam, sorry. Just coming back to earlier, you I think just skipped the solution to the.
Oh, so I did. You are absolutely correct. The solution, the important thing. So a solution for this one is to explicitly test assumptions. There's a tool that I use called the key assumptions check. So the Intel folks in the room will know this one probably very well. So this is a way for you to very systematically and very explicitly elicit assumptions that either you have or the group has, and go through a structured process of validating them and checking them. And then when you get to the end of that, you can then make a determination based on everything that we've looked at for this particular assumption. Is this something that we want to continue with? I find whenever I do this with teams, and I've used this with teams from frontline teams through to boards, it is always so illuminating. And people, I hear every time, really? You thought that? Really? You're working under that assumption? It is so powerful, but explicitly testing assumptions can help to control this false consensus bias, because otherwise we all think that everyone thinks like us, which is not true. Thank you for picking me up on that, mate. The last one is the bias blind spot. This is where we think that we are not ever influenced by cognitive biases, and that we know them all, and that we're all good. So what's happening here is that it almost becomes a almost like a do as I say, not as I do. Like people say, a leader might, say, talk about cognitive biases or call out someone else's cognitive bias. But when someone spots it in them, they'll say, no, I'm a very logical thinker. I'm an engineer, or I've got so much, experience. I couldn't possibly be influenced by cognitive biases. And what happens then is it makes it harder for people to speak up when they see their leaders perhaps under the influence of a cognitive bias, which then there's that perceived hypocrisy, do as I say, not as I do. You say you value input, but then you've got all of these bias blind spots and you're not calling them out, and it can really undermine credibility. So what you can look for here is that if the leader or anyone is acknowledging a bias in someone else, but they're not acknowledging their own. If they get very defensive, or they start to deflect or do the old salute, the blaming, the pointing around, whenever their decisions are questioned, or whenever they're questioned on any of their potential biases. And I think another one also is where there's inconsistent application of fairness or evaluation criteria. So that inconsistent application is a suggestion that you know, there's something else at play here. Maybe there's a bias that's coming into play. How this works in the wild, it was a few weeks ago, maybe about, I think it was mid-July, I ran a similar session for intelligence professionals. And there's a couple here who are on the call today. So they get a couple of bonuses from their colleagues who joined that session. And intelligence analysts are specifically trained to spot and mitigate cognitive biases. It's a big part of their job. And yet I actually did a survey before that one and tested which cognitive biases could people most be subject to. And bias blind spot was number 3. So even for people who are trained to recognize, to spot, and to, I suppose, avoid cognitive biases, it's still there. You've still got the bias blind spot. So again, you can't outlogic cognitive biases because your brain is smarter than you, if that makes sense. So what can we do about this? So using feedback loops. So asking people, genuinely asking people for feedback on, you know, the things that you're saying and the choices that you're making. And, you know, asking people maybe who know about cognitive biases in the room, or even setting it up in advance to say, you know, I'm really interested to learn about any cognitive biases that I might be displaying. If you see me doing any of these things, could you please let me know maybe outside the meeting, because I want to have a greater self-awareness of what's happening here. So using those feedback loops without getting defensive and taking it as a, you know, a great learning to learn about, you know, what are the cognitive biases that might be impacting you. I am going to keep moving because we're running short of time, and I know people probably have 9 a.m. meetings, so I won't ask for an example on this one. But, you know, if you want to share it later, or if you want to share it in the chat, please feel free to. So a little bit of a summary here, and I think that we have this for you that we'll drop into the chat a little bit later so that you can have it as a resource for you. So those 4 cognitive biases, what's the definition and what are the signals that you can be looking for? So this is kind of going to be like a handy guide for you to be able, you can almost play like cognitive bias bingo in your meetings today. Bingo when you spot each one. So this is a good thing for you to be able to just easy at hand, what are these cognitive biases and what might they, there you go. What I've also done, which will stick in the chat for you to download, is a little bit of a bias spotting template. So a structured way for you to be able to identify and also to analyze any cognitive biases that are happening. So you might not be able to see the detail there, but, you know, if you observe, identify, analyze, improve, and repeat. So when and where did it happen? What was the meeting? Who was involved? So not just so the roles of the people, so we can identify, was there an authority figure in there? What happened that caught your attention? What was the bias that you identified? What were the signals? What happened because of this cognitive bias? So there's some structured questions for you to be able to really reflect on. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Janine. So it's in the chat now for you to download, for you to be able to spot and analyze what's happening here with these cognitive biases. The reason that having templates like this, everyone kind of, you know, rolls their eyes and goes, oh, another thing for me to do. But the reality is that once you start practicing this and going through it, because of the wonders of neuroplasticity, which is a great feature of our brain, that means that the more we do something, the stronger neural pathways become, and it becomes more automated. You do this a few times and you're going to start doing it automatically. And so even though, you know, having this, yes, okay, I've got this template, I need to think about this in each of these steps, that is like short term. Because in the medium and long term, you'll start to do this automatically. And it's the only way to be able to do it, you know, in the moment, is if you're practicing it after the fact, and then you're going to get better at it. So I've called this notice, name, and replace. Okay, so I have a challenge for you. So this is not just, you know, 45 minutes of fun, go away. I do have some work for you to do. I would love for you over the next week to just observe in the meetings that you're in, the discussions that you're having. And you know what, they might be things at work, there might even be things at home. So cognitive biases are a human thing. They're not just a workplace thing. We don't turn off our cognitive biases when we go home at night, but just observe what's happening. Have a look out for these behavioral signals that we've looked at today and actually go through and do the analysis, use that template and see if you can see what's happening. Are there any trends? What are the impacts that are happening? And what I'm going to do is send you a invite for a check-in in not next week, the week after. And I just want to hear about how you went with your challenges. I will send it through if you would like to and the time fits, accept it. If you don't want to catch up, just decline. Absolutely no problem. If you want to, but the time's not great for you, then happy to reschedule that. But I think coming to this sort of thing and not trying to put something into practice means that everything will come in your ear and go out the other ear. So the more you can try and put something into practice, sooner rather than later, again, neuroplasticity, the better. So this is the kind of work that I do. So turning better thinking into better outcomes, anything related to decision making. So I run workshops, I do coaching, tailored decision making frameworks. So like this one I developed specifically for leaders looking at cognitive biases. But one of the joys of my life is, joys of my life, that makes me sound very sad, is creating structured tools that can actually help to scaffold decision making, whether that be individual, teams, or for organizations. It's kind of like training wheels. If you put the training wheels on the bike as you're learning to ride, eventually it will become automatic. So the more you can have those structured techniques around your decision making, the better. And then I also speak for a living. But now I would love some questions if you have any. We've got 6 minutes.
So I have a couple of questions.
Please.
Just with the authority bias, which is something that I've experienced. My experience is that when you become the person that asks questions to try and break the authority bias, at times it can feel like you're kind of the ostracized one or the negative one, or you're the person that other people rely on to do that. And it often feels quite challenging.
Yes.
Because other people are relying on you to be discerning and speak up to challenge the authority. How do you stop yourself being either, in a sense, marginalized or kind of ostracized?
I mean, so there's a couple of things in there. Number one is if other people aren't asking the questions and they're relying on you, there's a reason for that. So is it because they don't feel safe to ask those questions so that they don't? If that's the case, of seeing you ask questions is going to be really helpful for them. You could do something like have a chat with them offline and say, hey, I know it looks like you're wanting to ask questions all the time, but you don't. Is there anything that I can help you feel a little bit safer so that you feel safe to ask questions? Because while that's great in the meeting that you're in with them, that's not going to help them in any other meeting that they're in. So anything that you can do, given that you do have that confidence and that natural curious bent, if you like, what can you do to help them? In terms of the feeling ostracized, depending on who is making you feel ostracized, then I suppose the question would be, what are the behaviors? Because oftentimes we can see a behavior when we put our own interpretation on it. So no one actually might be doing anything to make you, to ostracize you, but yes, your interpretation. So one thing that might be helpful is just go and have a chat with them, either before a meeting or after a meeting, and say, hey, I noticed that I saw this, I saw that you did this, or, you said this, could you tell me about what you meant? Because a lot of the times we create our own meaning in our mind that isn't actually the case. So there's just a couple of tips that might be helpful, but happy to chat afterwards, Emily.
Thanks, Samantha. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? I can see, May, you've got a bunch of questions in there. I might have a side chat with you on those if that's okay, because there's a lot.
Yeah, totally. And I heard someone else had a question. They were about to jump in when Emily
please.
jumped in.
And that was me, but I then got distracted by your answer and I've forgotten my question.
Your cognitive bias, your high performance machine zoned in on Emily's question. If you do think about Alice, just drop me a line. Happy to answer it after the fact.
No worries.
Any other questions?
How do you get the balance between, I guess, speed of decision making and quality of decision making? Because as you said at the start, biases actually can be positive as well.
Look, absolutely, Britt. And, I think that concept of what are the training wheels that I can put on these decisions just to give me a little bit of structure and support so that I'm a little bit less wobbly is what's going to help get you on the way. So again, thinking about neuroplasticity, what's the structure, what's the scaffolding that I can put around the important decisions to make sure that I've got this this balance between time and quality. Because if you have no structure and you have no scaffolding, you kind of got to spend a few minutes to think about, how am I going to make this decision, which takes time and will impact quality. If you have a pre-existing scaffold that you use, you don't have to think about that. So you can go straight into what you know is a structured and more rigorous process than just freeballing it. So training wheels while you kind of get used to, and while those neural pathways of how do I solve these particular kind of problems builds. That would be my tip. Thank you. Right, we are at 8:59. For those who are in the northern states, or are we actually on the same? Well, I think we're on the same times now, unless you're in Perth or Adelaide. But I really want to say thank you to everyone for joining this morning. Thank you for sharing your stories. It's been really fantastic. We'll book those check-ins into your diary. If there's any questions that you have, please reach out to me. You know where to find me. Otherwise, have a fantastic day and watch out for those cognitive biases.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.